Something I love about this hobby is how it expresses who we are and can even serve as a reflection to our own personal growth and change. Because the changes I've made in how I collect and what I collect often parallel changes that I've made in my approach to life. And so I thought it would be interesting to start up a new series where I talk about some of those changes. And I want to hear from you, what changes have you made in your collecting journey that also reflect the changes you've made in your life? And I thought I would start off by talking about 5 characters that I used to hate and why I've come to love them. Now I want to hear from you. Are there any characters that you've grown to love over time? Well, I'm going to start out my list at number 1 with Dr. Doom. Now, if you watch my channel, you know that Dr. Doom is my all-time favorite character. But it certainly did not start out that way, because I was introduced to him along with pretty much the whole Marvel Universe in the Secret Wars miniseries. And I was blown away by how many cool characters there were in this epic story. And I was disgusted by Dr. Doom, because among all these people that had all these cool powers, here was this guy with no powers who was just dominating people and somehow was able to steal the power of the Beyonder, which was basically God. And I just couldn't stand it. How can this loser basically become like God? And I just couldn't suspend my disbelief as a child. Well, that all changed years later when I got back into collecting and read What If number 25. And in that issue, and it's obviously not even part of canon, it's a what if story, he has an encounter with the god Set. And he just shows this incredible amount of willpower, and all of a sudden a light bulb goes off in my head where I realize, well, Dr. Doom isn't great because he has some kind of external powers, but he's great because of his internal willpower that drives him to that greatness. And this was around the same time that I started getting interested in sports. And of course, if you grow up in sports, something you hear all the time is the person who wins is the one who wants it the most. Now, I don't really believe that fully anymore as an adult, but that's what you hear growing up. And so all of a sudden I saw Doom is the one who wants it the most. And that's the kind of person that I want to be like. And it inspired me, and I began to love that character. Now, later on, it didn't hurt that I started to realize, oh, he's not such a weakling after all. In fact, he's basically Iron Man combined with Doctor Strange, combined with Reed Richards. And so he is awesome. Now, the second character that I've grown to love is another one that has no actual powers, and that's the Punisher. But the reason I originally hated him wasn't because of his lack of powers, but because I was a kid who had a very black and white sense of morality and couldn't believe that anyone would cheer on someone who was just going around murdering and killing people. But then, as an adult, I realized morality is a little more complex. And even though I don't really believe in the value system of the Punisher, I began to really appreciate his thought process and how someone could arrive at where he was at. Plus, I began to understand, just like Doom, man, this dude is great, not because of his powers on the outside, but because of his internal power and his drive and his sense of justice and of a code. And again, I don't fully agree with his code, but just living by a code at all is something that really appealed to me as a young man. And I started to love movies where you have this vigilante type character. I mean, in recent years, pretty much the parallel to the Punisher is John Wick. And I love the John Wick movies and how this guy who is up against all odds is able to emerge victorious pretty much simply because of his willpower. Now, obviously, both the Punisher and John Wick have an incredible amount of skill as well, but it's their sense of justice, their sense of living by their code, their sense to do what's right, even though, again, that might not be what actually is right, that inspires us. In fact, when it comes to John Wick, it's a movie I want to show some of my older children, but my wife has been hesitant so far to allow us to have a big kid movie night watching it, because she knows, okay, we're not supposed to be vigilantes. And I said, I think they're old enough to piece that together, and what I want them to see is just this guy who has this code. But for now, my kids haven't seen the movie. Hopefully one day they can join me in my love of John Wick, and then of course the Punisher as well. And that brings me to number 3, which is the Beast. Now, as a kid, I hated him because next to people shooting optic blasts out of their eyes or moving objects with their mind or creating these cool ice slides, someone who just seemed to be a very excellent gymnast just didn't seem that impressive to me. And that all changed in the Age of Apocalypse storyline, where we're introduced to the Dark Beast. And since that time, there have at least been periods where the Beast has basically served in the role of a mad scientist. Now, back in college, I majored in biology and religious studies. And so I have always been fascinated by bioethics and thinking about emerging technologies and science. And with the Beast recently, you have cloning, and is that good? Is that bad? And I just love that character. And again, the moral complexity that he brings. All right, at number 4, we have Gambit. And as a kid, I couldn't understand why so many people liked him, because he just seemed like an arrogant jerk to me. And I was so frustrated that Rogue, the Southern Belle, fell in love with him, because I'm like, you sweet girl, why are you going to chase after this jerk? Well, as I grew up, I began to realize, well, Gambit has this tough exterior, but deep down, he's really a softie. He really cares for people. And this became the type of man that I wanted to be. Someone who was tough, maybe even a little bit arrogant, but deep down really cared for the people that I love. And I at least like to think those are the qualities that helped my wife fall in love with me, that I had this balance of toughness and this balance of compassion. Now, the more likely story is that she just had compassion on me for being some nerdy comic collector, and out of the goodness of her heart decided to marry me. But in my imagination, I'm this tough yet gentle bad boy. And at number 5, we have Venom. And when I was introduced to this character, he was the arch nemesis of my favorite hero as a kid, Spider-Man. And he just seemed unbeatable, especially since Spidey sense couldn't detect him, and so he could just sneak up on Peter at any moment. And there was this one comic where he showed up on Aunt May's doorstep, and it seemed like he was even going to get Peter's sweet old aunt. And he just seemed so scary and so bad that I hated him. And all of a sudden that began to change when Carnage was introduced into the storyline, who was even a worse Venom. And all of a sudden you, of course, start seeing this change in Venom, where like the Punisher, he always lived by a code. Not one that I fully agreed with, but he had rules. And I always respect someone who has rules. And so he created a truce with Spider-Man that, hey, until we get Carnage under control, I'm going to leave you alone. I hate you, Spider-Man, but I don't want any innocents to suffer. And so let's have this temporary team up and destroy Carnage. And I respected that. And all of a sudden, I began to like this character. And especially since, of course, his suit allows him to do a lot of creative things, and it's just really fun. And I still don't like him as much as Spider-Man, but I like him quite a bit. And once again, what I love about this topic is that my change in attitude towards these characters reflect my own personal journey in life. Of course, as a kid, I saw the world in very clear black and white terms. But as I began to mature, all of a sudden I realized, hey, there's a little more gray than I first thought. And that meant all of a sudden characters like the Punisher, Doom, the Beast became more interesting to me. And as a kid, I was just blown away by the coolness of certain superpowers that different characters had. But as I began to mature, I started to think, hey, it's not really our abilities that define us as much as it is our internal drive. And so even though each of us have different abilities, we all can become a greater version of ourselves. And that really inspired me to begin to admire characters, again, like Doom and the Punisher. But once again, what characters have you changed your mind in over time, and why? If you haven't subscribed to this channel, please consider doing so now. Like, comment, thank you.